Join me for my biggest yearly rankings yet. It's time for 1986. Welcome to my ranking of all the films I've seen from the year 1986. I have seen 26 different films from this year. That is a record for this series so far. As such, I didn't particularly feel the need to go and watch any additional films over the past week. I will say that I don't think the quality in 86 was that great. I mean, we've got a lot of very mediocre films to wade through today. It's only really in the top half of this list where we get to some really good films, in my opinion. The top two are very good, though, I will say that. Now, just a quick reminder that those top films, those top two, will be going through to the eventual grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. But for now, let's get stuck in and find out what is my 26th and therefore least favourite film that was released in 1986. What the hell is this film supposed to be? Three guys who look like they've just walked out of a high street costume shop somewhere in Mexico, going up against this really pantomime villain. My dad, bizarrely, really liked this film. When it came on TV, he just had to tape it. We went round to my aunt's house the night it was on, and it turns out she really liked the film as well. So I was sat there watching it with them, and I was just completely bored, senseless. It's not a funny film, it's not entertaining, and I'd completely forgotten that Chevy Chase and Martin Short were in it. All I could remember was Steve Martin, but this is not a great start today. Really, really bad film. This, I think, was an attempt to replicate the magic of E.T. Not that I thought there was any magic in E.T., but a lot of people did. But honestly, I had no interest in this film, even back in 1986, when I would have been the age of its target audience. I was 6 in 1986, but I'd already moved into stuff like Rambo. I matured very quickly in terms of my film watching tastes. I just had no interest in watching a young boy flying around in a tin can talking to some kind of weird AI computer system. I'm actually disappointed in myself that I watched this film even once, because it just meant that when it came to this video, I felt obligated to take the time to dig out a picture and talk about the movie for possibly up to a minute in order to keep the integrity of this film series consistent. I will at least say that this one isn't a bad film, not that I've given it a minute's thought in years. I'll tell you a funny story about Short Circuit. Now, I'm not the sort of guy who suffers from nightmares, but I had this one nightmare when I was a kid, which has always stuck with me. I've never forgotten it. So basically, I was running through Stafford Town Centre, I think it was, and I was being chased by Johnny Five, except it was an evil version of Johnny Five, and nobody on the street was helping me. So I ducked into this library, except it wasn't the normal type of library with just like rows and rows of shelves. It was like a maze of bookshelves. So I went into the maze, and the evil Johnny Five came in. I could hear his machinery over the bookshelves. So I was like, what the hell am I going to do? I could go around any corner at any moment and run into this thing. And I think that's roughly when I woke up, and I just thought I'd share that. I'm in a funny mood today. I think it's the heat. You shouldn't make videos when it's hot. That's not a knife, that's a knife. That would have been better if I had an actual machete. I'm not the biggest Crocodile Dundee fan. I actually prefer the second one to the first one. I'll talk about that one more when we get to it. The first Crocodile Dundee is a perfectly fine sort of drama, romance. It's not really my thing, and I did watch it about 3 times back in the bad old days when people had much less to do in their lives. I've not seen the third one. Has anybody seen the third one? Does Paul Hogan even know that he made a third one? Say in the comments if you've seen Crocodile Dundee 3 and let me know what it's like. So here's our first horror film of the day. For some reason, I seem to always end up doing videos where I have to talk about Texas 2. So I did a full review of this quite some time ago. Then I did a Texas Chainsaw rankings, which meant I had to then talk about Texas 2 some more. And now I'm doing this 1986 rankings, which means I have to talk about Texas 2 again. I need to stop coming up with video ideas, which means I have to talk about Texas 2. I'm tired of talking about this film. It's one of the worst sequels of all time, in my opinion, relative to the quality of the film before it, which is an absolute masterpiece in this case. If Tobe Hooper had wanted to do some kind of cannibal comedy, I wish he'd just not put the Texas Chainsaw name on it, or at worst, called it Texas Chainsaw blah blah as if it's a spin-off and not used the number 2. Let somebody else have the number 2 when they were ready to come in and do a proper sequel. I mean, this film is the same as if Spaceballs had been an official Star Wars film. You know, Star Wars 7, Spaceballs, that would have been hideous. So may this be the last time I end up looking into a camera talking about this movie. Karate Kid 2 is a reasonable sequel. I mean, it doesn't tear up any bonsai trees, but it's okay. At least it does its own thing rather than just copy the first film, which is basically what the third film does. There's a nice travelogue feel because Daniel and Mr. Miyagi are now going to Japan. I know it was filmed mostly in Hawaii, I think, but it's easy to believe that it's Japan. There's not much fighting involved in this one from what I can remember. There's only really like a big fight at the end, but it's more of a drama film than a fighting film, and it's okay. I'm not the biggest Karate Kid fan, but I can cut this one some slack. This is another one I'm only lukewarm on, really. I've never been into aerial dogfighting in movies. It's why I've never bothered with any of the Iron Eagle films. And I got bored of Firefox halfway through. This used to be a bit of a family favourite film in our house. I can remember more than one Sunday afternoon spent watching this with lots of different family members sat either side of me. And I remember getting really uncomfortable when Kelly McGillis and Tom Cruise head for the bedroom. There's also that really annoying moment where Maverick's friend dies. It's just really sad. The only things I enjoy about Top Gun are Tom Cruise's performance and the soundtrack, which is pretty awesome actually, but I can't say I was massively thrilled when I heard that they were going to be making a second one. It's not a good enough excuse to tear Tom Cruise away from his very important Mission Impossible duties. That is God's work as far as I'm concerned, and you don't pull him away from that without a good reason. This is a weird one because my abiding memory of Ferris Bueller is watching the trailer over and over again. We rented so many films which just happened to have the trailer for this on the front of them. It was like we were being trolled or something, but it was a good trailer to be fair. But when I finally saw the full film, I was a little bit underwhelmed. I just couldn't really get into watching this goofball playing truant and doing all these daft things. Mia Sara looks great in the film, but that's not a good enough reason for me to call the film good. But just for the fact that the trailer is absolutely legendary, I'm going to put this in 19th. So from the very silly to the very serious, this is about a journalist played by James Woods who has just lost his job, but he travels down to Ecuador anyway, hoping to take some freelance photographs of all the stuff that's going on down there. This particular country is a hotbed of political activity. It's got a very depressing tone, this film. And this character who we follow, he's a little bit weird. He's constantly begging for money because he's got none just so he can get his next meal. He's always begging other journalists for extra reels for his camera because he's run out of that as well. And lots of bad things happen in this. We meet nice characters who then die, and the film can't even cut the main guy a break at the end. I mean, he tries to take this girl back to the States with him because he's finally fallen for somebody, and you think, okay, something nice has finally happened to him. And then the police step in and take this Ecuadorian girl away from James Woods' character. And that was probably the point where I thought to myself, well, maybe I'm not quite going to be a fan of this film, but I'm glad I watched it once. It's unique. I've not seen anything like it. This is an excellent film about a guy who slowly starts to turn into a giant fly. It's better than it sounds. The practical effects of the transformation are incredible, and Jeff Goldblum's performance in the lead role is absolutely masterful. So why is this film only 17th? Because it has absolutely no rewatchability at all for me. This is one of the most depressingly bleak films I think I have ever seen. I've only seen it once when I was about 17, I've not seen it since. I've no desire to watch it again. I'm never going to buy it. There's this doctor character in this who gets his hands melted off by fly acid. That's just one example of some of the really nice things that you'll see when you're watching The Fly. There's this other guy who goes to arm wrestle the main character, and like you see all the bits of his bone just crack out of his arm. It's gnarly. You feel like slitting your own wrist after you've watched The Fly. It's really dark. I can't even emphasize that enough. But the first thought I did have when the credits rolled was that it was a superb film. I'll give it that. This is a film with a fairly decent reputation, but I don't think it's quite as good as the novella that it's based upon. Stephen King wrote this story fairly early on in his career. When I read it just a few years ago, I got so into the story and so into the characters that it literally made me wish that I'd grown up in wherever it is that the story's set. Even though a lot of these kids apparently grew up in poverty and their parents weren't particularly nice to them, that's just how powerful the tale is. I don't think the movie truly captures all of that, but it's still got its moments. The bit where they have to go across the railway track is quite unnerving, and Kiefer Sutherland plays a fairly intense bad guy. It's still a very good drama. This is easily the best of the Highlander films, and it's still only managed to come this high in my ranking for 1986. I don't think you'll find a better example in cinema history of a franchise which has been so undermined by poor sequels. There just didn't need to be any sequels to the original Highlander. It was a classic, one and done. I like how the film is told sort of out of sequence. We get to see the Highlander in the Second World War and in various other different time periods. I was never the biggest fan of the soundtrack. I know a lot of people are. I've never been a big Queen fan, but I like the performance by Sean Connery. That's a lot of fun, and I could possibly watch Highlander again, but let me make this absolutely clear. This should have been a one-off film. This is one which is probably not quite as good as us older millennials will often claim. I watched it with my kids a couple of years ago, and even though I still found the film delightful, there's now part of my brain which just screams at me, David Bowie's the bad guy. The puppets are really obvious. I think the reason why I've put it this high in the ranking today is partly because of that nostalgia factor. I think if I'd have just watched this film for the first time this week, I think it would have come a lot lower. I don't know what it says about my personality, by the way, but my favourite part in this film has always been when she's stuck in the really long corridor. Because when I first watched the film as a kid, I found that a really fascinating conundrum. I was curious to see how she would get out of it. Once she gets past that bit, the rest of the film is mostly a blur of animatronics and all kinds of random goofiness, but it's still fun and it's harmless, and I do call myself sort of a fan of the film. So here we have a film about pool, or eight ball as I believe they call it in the States. Is that correct? Me and a friend used to love this film when we were at uni. We watched it about 3 times together. There's so many quotable lines from this film, and me and my friend used to quote them to each other when we went down the pool hall. So I'd be breaking off and suddenly he'd shout to me, "Kid's got a sledgehammer break," and things like that. There's this other line as well, something like, "I'll spot you the black." I don't even know what that means. "I'll spot you the black, I'll spot you the white." We used to say that to each other in the pool hall, even though we didn't quite knew what the characters were on about in the film. The downside to this film, though, is the hustling angle. I'm a great sports purist. I love sports. I don't like to see people with great talents wasting them like Tom Cruise's character does in this film. I'm just not into hustling. I'd have rather this film was just focused on characters actually trying to win, win trophies, get the glory, a bit like what Rocky was trying to do. So that side of things I could do without, but it's still an entertaining film full of good catchphrases. It's actually a sequel. Probably not everybody knows that, but there was this film that came out in the 60s. I think it was called The Hustler, which actually had Paul Newman in it, not Tom Cruise. He would have been too young. The Hustler, if I've got the name of the film right, it's a better movie than The Colour of Money from what I can remember, albeit The Colour of Money is a little bit more funny. Platoon is a very gritty war film. My abiding memory of it is this one moment where this character comes out of a mud hut and both of his arms have blown off. You know in that moment that this film is not mucking around, and there's a part very late on where a sergeant randomly shoots dead one of his own. I can't remember why he does this. It's been too long since I saw Platoon. I need to give it a rewatch. Charlie Sheen's in it back in the days when he was a serious actor and he didn't piss people off. I almost feel like this is the sister film to Commando in that it's just another excuse for Schwarzenegger to shoot dead 100 guys, except this time he's doing it in Chicago and he's killing mobsters instead of soldiers. And this film isn't as good as Commando. The last half an hour is wildly entertaining, but it's been a long time since I forced myself to sit through the hour that leads up to that. What I will say is that this film has one of my favourite ever Schwarzenegger sequences when he puts the Rolling Stones song Satisfaction onto his car cassette deck and then just drives around shooting all these guys on top of these big soil piles or whatever it's meant to be. But Raw Deal is definitely middle of the road Schwarzenegger. It's not one of his very best, which is why it's just missed out on the top 10 today. When I did my 1985 rankings, the first Demons film came fourth, which was a really good effort. This second one doesn't quite chart as high, but it's still a good sequel. Earlier this year, I bought the Arrow double pack for Demons 1 and 2. It came with loads of features and posters and bits and bobs. It's a really nice set. This second film is set in an apartment block, but it doesn't quite capture that lightning in a bottle magic that the first film had, but it's still good. I did full reviews for both Demons films earlier this year. You'll find those in my other horror films playlist. It's called something like that. Yeah, this series didn't quite have enough movies to justify me giving it its own playlist. This is a classic film. I've not seen the remake, which sort of surprises me because I really do like Sean Bean. My dad just randomly brought this home once when I was about 14. It's sort of like Steven Spielberg's Duel, except you get to see the killer walking around and talking. His fingerprints don't show up on any national databases, so God knows where he's meant to have come from, but they say what you don't know is scarier. It's a bit like the whole Michael Myers thing in Halloween. Definitely my favourite scene in this is when the main guy, he's eating chips in a gas station and he just randomly picks up a finger off his plate and he doesn't spot it for the longest time. I can't remember how Rutger Hauer even manages to pull that off, how he manages to get the finger on the plate. Presumably there is a window of opportunity. It's a little bit far-fetched how he always seems to know where his prey is in this film. I mean, it's this massive sort of desert landscape somewhere in Arizona. I forget which state the film takes place in, but it's a really good film. And come to think of it, this is one I am long overdue in adding to my shelf. If you told me in 2021 that they were going to bring out a Star Trek film set mostly on Earth, I would probably be appalled, because if I'm in the mood to watch Star Trek, I want to watch a story that's set in space. I want to see them explore new realms, etc., etc. But luckily, when it comes to The Voyage Home, I've had sort of a relationship with this film since I was a very young child, so it doesn't bother me that most of this is on Earth. I can vaguely remember watching this film on Saturday afternoons when I was about 10. It's a fun tale. It's got that legendary moment where Chekhov goes on about the nuclear vessels. The woman who's in this, who Kirk sort of almost romances, I've seen her in something else as well. She's a really good actress, but her name has totally escaped me. These Star Trek films are doing quite well in these rankings. I've noticed they're consistently getting into the top 10s, but we've yet to have one qualify for the grand final. Will it be Star Trek V, The Final Frontier? We will see. This one almost didn't make today's list because when I first scrolled past it on Wiki the other day, I didn't recognise it, but something about the title stuck in my head and I went back and checked again and looked at the plot on Wiki eventually. And then I was like, oh yes, I remember this film. This film's absolutely awesome. What a great idea, by the way, putting Clint Eastwood in charge of a platoon of troops and then going on a mission. It's so much fun, this movie. I'd totally forgotten the name of it. It's not going to challenge your intellect in the same way that Salvador does when it comes to war films, but it's so much fun. And just talking about it has desperately made me want to watch this one again, actually. It's a really good, fun Clint Eastwood film. I could easily imagine that this is quite a polarizing film among horror aficionados because of the plot twist at the end, which I'm not going to spoil here. I'm kind of on the fence with the big twist, partly because I've not seen the film in a long, long time. I did look into buying this on DVD or Blu-ray a while back, and to my disappointment, it's not available on Region B. I've not seen it since I was a teenager, but I remember being really creeped out by it. It's a really good film in the build-up to the finale, at least. And there's this one scene which I've never forgotten where the camera just lingers on this boathouse. And when I was watching it, I thought I could just make out the killer inside the doorway in the dark. And I was looking at the screen thinking, is that him? Is that him? And because it was on TV, I couldn't rewind it and just keep checking until I was sure one way or the other. You know, on TV, it's live, you've got to move on, you can't go back. So I think when I eventually do finally somehow end up rewatching this film, I'm going to be fascinated to watch that scene again and find out all these years later whether I was right or not. I've never seen the remake, similar to The Hitcher, so at some point I'd like to do a double bill of these, but the original film was done very well to come sixth today. The Critters franchise is sort of something you had to have been there at the time to have enjoyed, I think. I was just getting into horror around about the time that it was normal for people to rent Critters films and enjoy them, and even I only went up to the end of number 3 before I got fed up with it all. I never saw number 4, and I've never seen the revival film. I've certainly never met anybody who says they've got into Critters quite recently. What I really would have liked to have done for this clip is just for a laugh sing Power of the Night, the song that plays all the way through this film, because I don't mind making a tit of myself on YouTube, but you can't sing anything on YouTube without getting a copyright strike. So sadly, no singing, but I really do like the bounty hunters in this, and the town that you see in this film, it's the sort of place, like with Stand By Me, that made me just want to live there when I used to watch this film. And from memory, I used to really fancy the teenage girl that's in the film, although right now I cannot even picture what she looks like. It's been that long. So I need to rewatch this, just like I need to rewatch April Fool's Day. Psycho 3 was the first one in the series that I ever saw. It was my first ever glimpse of the world of Norman Bates. The order that I saw these films was 3, 2, 4, 1, I think, because British television never used to show the films within a franchise in order. For something like Psycho, they would just show a random film from the series every now and again, which was fine. I mean, I still enjoyed them. These days, I have the freedom to watch them in order, if I was to choose to do so. But this is one of the most consistently good horror franchises out there. I think I said this when I was talking about Psycho 2, but the only film in this franchise which is in any way weak is probably the 4th one, and that's still really good, actually. I don't count the remake as a proper Psycho film. At some point I would like to do a review series for this, because I think these would be very fun films to explore and analyse and do a video about. If you were with me for my 84 and 85 rankings, you may remember me teasing the fact that we had not yet got to my favourite Chuck Norris film of all time. Well, now we are finally here. The Delta Force is that film, but it doesn't quite make the grand final, sadly. It's only 3rd today, but wow, what a fun movie it is, though. Chuck Norris is absolutely impenetrable in this film. It's got a strange structure in terms of its plot. It's sort of like a Call of Duty campaign, I think. But what I really remember about this is the music that plays all the way through. There's this really corny tune, and boy, do they overplay. I remember saying to somebody at school once when this was coming on TV, I said, watch out for the tune that plays all the way through. It's constant, and I mean constant. And this guy was like, oh, yeah. Next time I saw him, he was like, you weren't kidding about that tune, were you? And I was like, no. I actually remember the exact time that I saw this film. It was the summer of 1994. It was during the Football World Cup that was in the USA, or the Soccer World Cup, depending on where you live. And this was just one of those films that I watched quite a few times during that summer, and I really got into it. So I think even if I rewatched it now, I would think of the summer of '94. So here we have our first qualifier for the grand final today. It's Friday the 13th, part 6, our second Friday film to qualify for that grand final, the other one being the original Friday the 13th. It's curious to me that part 2 and part 4 have not qualified, two films which at various points in my life have been top of my Friday the 13th rankings, depending on how I was feeling at the time, but that is just the randomness of the format. I don't want to talk too much about part 6 today because I just don't feel like doing so. I recently did a very in-depth review about the film, so go and check that out if you'd like to hear me talk about one of the best slasher films to come out in the 80s. But for now, let's move on and find out what is the winner of my 1986 film rankings. Game over, man, game over. Aliens is the winner. I absolutely love this film. I've loved it since the beginning of the 90s. The first time I saw this, I then went on to watch it again about 10 times that first year after I saw it for the first time. I was obsessed with it. I bought an Aliens comic. I bought a few Alien novels. I found this like-minded friend at school, and we just used to talk about Aliens all the time. I'm very much an Aliens man. I've not done any videos about Aliens yet, possibly because it's a bit sci-fi, and I tend to do videos that are more, straight-laced horror films, if you like, but this film is amazing. I cannot even emphasize that enough. I do watch the director's cut whenever I do watch it, although I am kind of mixed on the quality of the director's cut. I like a lot of the newer scenes, but I don't like the scenes with the colony. I kind of feel like when the soldiers turn up at the colony, you should never have seen it before because it's just scarier. But these are discussions for another day if I ever do decide to do more of an in-depth talk about Aliens. But certainly it is streets ahead of any other film in this ranking, even Friday the 13th Part 6 in second place. I think Aliens could be a real contender when we get to the grand final. Right, there is one more question left to ask today. For some reason, I've only written down Poltergeist 2 when I checked just now. It's possible that because we've got 26 films in today's ranking that I've pretty much licked the barrel dry when it comes to this particular year. But let me know in the comments if there are any other films I did not include today which you think I should give a watch. But it's been a long video. I'm going to spare you from any more. Aliens and Friday the 13th Part 6 will be going through to the grand final, and I will be back very soon with my 1987 rankings. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.